6. Yeah.
Welcome to Issues That Matter. I'm Cynthia Pooler. My guest today is Alan Collinge, and Alan and I are going to talk about the failure of Congress to pass bankruptcy protection for student loan borrowers. So, Alan, you've been working on this for looks like half your life, right?
About a third of my life now, it looks like, since I was about 35 years old. It's been 18 years now. And, we've been fighting at Student Loan Justice. We've been fighting very moderately for the return of bankruptcy protections to student loans. And this most recent congressional session, we had two great bills in the Senate and in the House. Dick Durbin was the sponsor in the Senate. It was a bipartisan bill. We had every indication that the bills were going forward. And then at the very, very end of the session, right before Christmas, there's no real pretty way to put it. The Democrats who control Congress and the presidency, they made the conscious decision to betray us and not pass the bill. And we've been disappointed before, Cynthia, but I have to say that this is an historic betrayal. This one really stung.
So at the last minute, how much effort did Dick Durbin put in?
Very little that I could see. It was like I said, it was the stakes were very, very high this time, not only for the people, but for the Democrats. The stakes were very high. And, at the very end, we aired a nationally televised documentary called Lone Wolves, which you can see on Peacock now, actually. And the whole point of the documentary was this legislation. And so the stakes were very high. And what we saw from Durbin and his staff was essentially they were kicking and screaming the whole way. They were looking for reasons to say no. And we thought that they were inspired to pass this legislation, but the proof is in the pudding. And words are words, but their actions told the tale. And the tale was that, I'm not even sure that they ever really intended to pass this legislation at this point. And I should give you a little bit of a history here, Cynthia. This battle goes back to, 2006, really. The last time the Democrats held a majority in the Senate and the House and the presidency was 2008. So they won Congress going into 2006 and held it through 2010. Well, one of the first things that the Democrats said they were going to do way back, this is before Barack Obama was president even, was return bankruptcy protections to student loans. I mean, the blatancy of this congressional constitutional betrayal of the citizens was obvious. And so we were expecting the Democrats to return bankruptcy to student loans going back to Barack Obama's first term in 2008. And lo and behold, at the very last minute, the Blue Dog Democrats banded together under lobbying pressure, I should say. And they defeated an amendment that was going to return bankruptcy protections to, at the time, private student loans. And that was a huge betrayal back then. And, that was 14 years ago. And the stakes were much lower back then, I should say. We probably owed not even $500 or $600 billion in student loans. Well, then again, in 2010, in the lame duck session in Congress after the election, we begged and pleaded the Democrats to return bankruptcy to student loans. And again, they betrayed us. And in 2010, we owed not even $1 trillion in student loan debt. So now we're pushing $2 trillion We're just coming out of a national emergency, this COVID pandemic. Um, Even before the pandemic, 85% of all student loan borrowers were never going to be able to repay their loans. Over half weren't paying before COVID. This lending system at this point is not only a national threat, but it's, by all rational metrics, a catastrophically failed scam. And it is a scam. Let's be clear here. These loans have been weaponized, and this all harkens back to the removal of bankruptcy protections. So we had every good reason to believe that the Democrats would act in their interests, politically, in the interests of the people, and just in the interest of common sense, the Constitution, and many, they had every reason not to fight for this lending scam. I for the life of me, I can't figure out what is so important about this lending system that the Democrats are willing to sacrifice, everything, throw everything away to keep this scam running. And I could maybe point a few fingers here. Obviously Dick Durbin deserves a huge amount of the discredit. But I will also say a couple of things, at least according to them, the reasons they gave for not pushing this bill through. Number one was the HBCUs, the historically Black colleges and universities. And it gives me great pain to have to say this, yeah, but at least according to Durbin's people, the HBCUs opposed this legislation. And for the life of me, again, the cruel irony of all the college groups that I could imagine opposing this bill, the HBCUs would be the last group you would imagine, because look at, African Americans in this country are hurt so badly by these loans. And, they will say, I'm sure, they opposed the legislation because there was a clawback mechanism in the legislation whereby the colleges, at least on paper, were liable to return up to half of the original amount borrowed to the government in the case of a loan discharge in bankruptcy. But, Cynthia, we've looked very hard at this problem for many years, and the Department of Education has never enforced similar penalties levied against the colleges, much less the HBCUs. So while on paper, in the public conversation, they'll say that the HBCUs opposed it. Quite frankly, I think there was something else going on behind the scenes. I think all of the colleges didn't like this clawback mechanism. And quite frankly, I suspect that all of the colleges really like keeping bankruptcy gone from these loans for a myriad of reasons. I think a lot of people in the student loan swamp didn't want to rock the boat, and returning bankruptcy makes a lot of people in Washington, D.C. nervous.
So
Maybe one final point on this legislation, and I really hate to have to say this, but leading senators like Elizabeth Warren, who taught bankruptcy law at Harvard, they were very ominously and obviously silent. They refused to support this bill. Elizabeth Warren, who taught bankruptcy at Harvard, as I said, she was asked by a reporter at the Boston Globe whether she supported this bill or opposed it. And she refused to answer the question. She said, "Oh, I don't want to negotiate against myself." Like, I don't even know what that means, but Elizabeth Warren went out of her way to not support this bill. And that's probably putting it pretty mildly. When our House bill, companion bill, was supposed to be heard in the Senate, there was a hearing scheduled. Elizabeth Warren, at the very same time that hearing was supposed to happen, Elizabeth Warren calls a press conference, makes a big splash in the media, sort of steals all the spotlight from the event to announce her own bankruptcy legislation that hadn't even been proposed yet. And it's sort of a pie in the sky legislation. And next session, I guarantee you, when she actually introduces this bill, there's no way it's going to pass, because we're now headed into a divided Congress. Now, Elizabeth Warren knew all these things. She didn't even mention our bill at all. And lo and behold, shortly after that press conference, the hearing for our bill, our House bill, was postponed, and it was never rescheduled. So I have to say that Senator Elizabeth Warren scuttled this legislation.
So who ultimately was responsible for taking bankruptcy protection away for student loan borrowers?
Well, that's a great question. You know, if you watch the documentary by Blake Zeff, it was aired on MSNBC on Christmas Eve, Christmas night, and people can find it on Peacock now. That is the point of the movie. The whole 90-minute film aims to answer that question. Who, it's kind of like a caper, like who was it that removed these protections? And so maybe I shouldn't give away the answer, but people can watch the film. But it goes right back to the Department of Education. You know, the unelected bureaucrats and others from the lending industry and elsewhere who have a strong financial interest in keeping this predatory lending con going. They deserve a lion's share of the credit. You know, as far as elected officials go, I think you can point the finger at probably many people. Congressman Jeffers from Vermont, Congressman McKeon from California. And quite frankly, going back to the original restrictions on bankruptcy, you can point to people like Senator Biden, then Junior Senator Biden from Delaware, now President Biden back in 1976. That's just a partial list. But Washington, D.C., and I would say maybe also Wall Street to a lesser extent these days, they love this predatory lending system. As failed as it is right now by all rational metrics, there are a lot of people that really want to keep this lending scam going. And
so what's the next step for you and your organization?
that's another great question, Cynthia. And frankly, I don't know. We're essentially on hiatus at this point. We certainly aren't going away. That much is clear. But I think it would be rather foolish of us to pursue actions through Congress anymore at this point.
Mhm.
I think Congress revealed that they are completely unwilling to do what's right to solve the student loan problem. You know, my worst fear was that, like they've done in years past, Congress, and I would say the president also, would foist a fake student loan cancellation on us as a cheap substitute for the constitutional bankruptcy rights that should have never been taken away. And lo and behold, you know, that trick was played on us for the third or maybe fourth time, depending on how you count it. So it's a great question, Cynthia. I know for a fact that we are not going away. You know, this problem is not going away. And this lending system is failing even more and more with every passing day. Whenever they try and turn on this lending con, my best guess is that less than 20% of the borrowers will even resume paying. So the lending system is still in catastrophic failure. It's not coming back. But what the practical steps are that our group takes, politically, strategically, otherwise, I'm waiting and watching and meditating right now. And we're gonna see how the dust settles and proceed from there in the new year.
So 80% of the people who can't pay, right? That's a lot of people. That's millions of people. So for all of those people that can't pay and they defaulted on their loans, what that means is that credit rating was destroyed. And being having a bad credit rating means if you want to buy something on credit, you're going to have to pay a higher rate for borrowing. So the banks are still making out because they're making more money because people defaulted on their loans, correct?
Yeah, unlike every other type of loan in this country, Cynthia, the student loan industry, at least historically, has been able to make far more money on defaulted student loans in many cases than on loans that remain in good stead. The defining hallmark of a predatory lending system. So, this is precisely why the founding fathers called for uniform bankruptcy laws in the Constitution. There's two ways to conquer and enslave a country, John Adams said. One is by the sword, the other is by debt. And there are some very dark forces in this country that would very happily enslave this country in debt. And, this student loan example is but the camel's nose under the tent. If they can do to other loans what they did to student loans, they will. And if the people allow this injustice to stand, there's no telling where this is going to end. Credit card debt, medical debt. They can make all consumer loans similarly non-dischargeable in bankruptcy if they wanted to. And that's a very, very, very troubling thought. Everybody out there needs to really think about that carefully.
So,
They said first they came for the trade unionists, and I was not a trade unionist, and so I did nothing, and so on and so forth. They'll come for you, ladies and gentlemen, if you don't have student loans. That's the path that we're on. But I want to be a little more optimistic than that, because at the end of the day, as I said, Cynthia, when 80+% of the people aren't paying, what are we even talking about? This lending system is one huge national joke at this point. It's vanishing into a mist of illegitimacy.
So the banks must be pretty upset that people can't pay their money back, but that the banks are getting a higher rate when people default on their loans if they want credit, right?
It's hard for me to speak for the banks. I'd probably want to ask someone like Jamie Dimon or others. We've heard some well-known bankers, including Jamie Dimon and others, Bill Dudley, for example, and actually they're quite concerned. They're quite concerned that the overwhelming amount of student loan debt is preventing people from borrowing money to do other things, like buy homes and start businesses and so on and so forth. So I think there's probably a diversity of opinion within the financial sector. But this isn't so much about the banks as it is the Department of Education anymore, Cynthia, because the federal government owns 87% of this debt. The federal government is the bank. And so really this comes down to a whole bunch of unelected bureaucrats in and around the Department of Education, people at the Treasury Department who we've seen fight tooth and nail to keep bankruptcy gone from these loans, members of Congress whose friends and family have benefited wildly from this lending scam over the years. Apparently they think they can push this toxic waste barrel, they can kick this toxic waste barrel a few more yards down the road. And I'm here to tell you that's not going to happen. The lending system is finished. The loans, by and large, will not be paid, Cynthia. They will not be paid. The loans, by and large, will be canceled. And that's just an absolute, unavoidable truth. And even the Wall Street Journal agrees that the large percentage of the federal portfolio is just garbage paper. It's never going to be collected.
So tell me a little bit about that documentary. Did the people at MSNBC contact you to be a part of that? How did that work?
Well, this actually goes back to 2014, believe it or not, when I was bouncing from hostel to hostel, living in Washington, D.C. 2014, a guy named Blake Zeff. Actually, it would have been early 2015. Contacted me, and he was at that time a youngish filmmaker, who had student loan debt of his own and a wife and a child with disabilities and so forth. And we just started a conversation at that point. And over, gosh, I guess 7 or 8 years now, Blake took this as a passion project. And I really couldn't tell you how he was able to get NBC involved. But I can tell you that this is a very strong film, and the whole point of the film gets back to really the core of this struggle for me and for millions of others in the student loan justice organization and around the world. But Blake's he's a smart guy, and he pulled it off. And I sort of wish the film would have come out maybe a couple of weeks earlier, just for political reasons, because of the timing of the bill and so on and so forth. But this is the strongest documentary ever made on the student loan problem, certainly on the bankruptcy issue. And people should go see it. It's called Lone Wolves, and they can watch it on Peacock.
I just checked my contacts, and I remember speaking with him a number of years ago. He's in my contacts on my phone.
Oh, no kidding. Yeah. He interviewed many of our friends and contacts and colleagues that we've met over the years. And I guess yourself included. That's really interesting. I know he interviewed, many of the people, that we've been working closely with over the years, people like Ike Brannon and, on and on, many people. But he was very diligent, very persistent, and, he really pulled a rabbit from a hat in getting this film done.
So has Matt Taibbi written anything in a while about the student loan debt crisis?
Good point. Yeah, I talked to Matt just a couple weeks ago, and I know he's very interested in the film. And we're not like best friends or anything like that, but he took some interest in the documentary. And by the way, he's actually interviewed in the other documentary that we were working on for 5+ years with Mike Collinge as well. But I think Matt's been really busy over the past couple of weeks. There's all the Twitter file stuff that's going on right now.
Right.
Most of his time, but I can't speak for Matt. He seems like a pretty busy guy to me these days, though.
So Blake's documentary, do you think that's going to reach a lot of people?
Yeah, I know that already over 1 million people have seen it. So I think this documentary is going to really grow on people. And I think it'll have a lot of legs. As I said, even before this pandemic, 85% of all federal student loan borrowers were never going to be able to repay their loans. That's 38 million people. And if you include private student loans, we're talking like 43, 42 million people in the country who are losing sleep over their student loans.
So do you think that Blake's documentary is stronger than what Mike Collinge had put together?
Well, it's really hard to compare the two because, Blake's documentary, the one that came out on Peacock, focuses very narrowly on the question of who took bankruptcy away from student loans. Like, nobody wanted to admit it. It was very hard to find a person willing to take credit for it. So it's kind of a different film. But Collinge's film, unfortunately, we were hoping that was going to come out, a year ago or more, and that's didn't happen. So it's kind of not really relevant.
Okay. So what's down the road for you and your organization?
Oh boy, I wish I knew, Cynthia. I really do. As I said, we're kind of on hiatus right now. We're certainly not going away. That much I can say for certain. But what the future holds it's anybody's guess. We're back. We're getting thrown back into the wilderness here Whether we'll even try anything with Congress or not, that's a very open question. I really don't think that we will. I don't think that's, um, I think it's insane. Doing the same thing over and over, expecting a different
Right.
outcome is not, is not what this group is all about. We're all about solving this problem. And at this point, I think, having a mass student loan burning or something is probably going to be what's the right thing to do going forward.
But ultimately, it's going to rest in the hands of Congress. They have to change the legislation, right?
Well, ultimately that's true, but I think the citizens need to get just much more stronger. The citizens need to stand up and fight like they've never fought before. And I think that's what's going to have to happen. And, um, student loans are essentially becoming one large national joke at this point. And at some point, the citizens have to stand up, and no matter what the nonsense coming over the news channels says, people need to grow a pair of nuts, quite frankly, and they need to fight way harder than how hard we saw them fight over the past 2-3 years since COVID and even well before. People out there thinking that there's some Superman out there is going to come in and solve this problem for them while they sit on the sidelines and eat popcorn. I've got very bad news for you. That is not going to happen. People out there with student loans need to realize this is their battle. This is their financial livelihood that hangs in the balance. And quite frankly, I don't want to put it on too thick, Cynthia, but honestly, this group right here, we're the only group in the country who's actually fighting this battle as it needs to be fought. The other groups out there, I would swear they're in league with the collection industry. The collection industry wanted nothing more than to foist a fake loan cancellation on the citizens as a cheap substitute for bankruptcy rights. And that's exactly what we got. And so anyways, I would just urge everybody to spread the word about this group and how important it is that people out there get educated and informed so they can fight in a very smart way, whatever that may look like in the new year.
So how would they join your organization?
Studentloanjustice.org. We'll take it from there.
Okay. And they would go on the internet to sign up for it, right?
Yep. That's
Okay.
by far and away the best way. We're not hiding. They can find us.
So how many members do you have? Do you know?
Well, we've got over 1 million, nearly 1.2 million people who've signed our petition. We've got a couple 100,000 people across, our Facebook group and our email list and Instagram and TikTok and Twitter and so forth. So, on the high side, I'd say we have around 1.45 million people.
Okay.
But those people have got to get way more active because this is not a wait, watch, and worry proposition here. This is an actual fight. This is not like, giving $5 to the local humane society and getting a T-shirt. That's not what our movement is about. This is an actual fight.
So, leading up to, the presidential election and, to the midterms and stuff, a lot of the politicians were mentioning student loan debt, but they never did anything about it, right?
No, I think it's becoming clear to everybody right now, and the Democrats are going to pay a huge price for this. The Democrats pimped this problem. They, going into the midterms, Biden was like, "Yeah, I'm going to cancel $10,000 or $20,000." Well, that was never even very impressive in the first place, but now it's very obvious that the Biden administration never intended to actually cancel loans. What they rolled out was purposely feckless and weak and open to legal challenge. And lo and behold, I would predict, Cynthia, that starting January 2nd or 3rd, whenever the new Congress rolls in, probably one of the first things Elizabeth Warren, for example, is going to do is she's going to say, yeah, bankruptcy. I'm gung-ho for bankruptcy. And I'm sorry, but that's just nonsense. That's not believable. The Democrats have lost all or most all uh, of whatever credit they had with the American people on this issue. They had every opportunity. They could have passed this bill. It would have sailed through Congress with ease. They had every opportunity, and the Democrats blew this historic opportunity. They rubbed it in our face. The betrayal was blatant. And at this point, it's kind of like no party for old men or something, no country for old men. It's
Right.
we're back in the wilderness, and the Democrats, they showed us what they're all about, and shame on them. The Republicans are evil, by the way, don't get me wrong, but the Democrats, it's kind of a good cop, bad cop thing. It's disgusting.
So Dick Durbin, he got two co-sponsors for the bill, Josh Hawley, who's a Republican, and Cornyn, right, in Texas.
Yep.
And have they said anything since this died?
No, they've said nothing. To their credit for coming onto the bill. But, I think intentions are everything, Cynthia, and I have to wonder whether any of those guys ever intended to pass this bill, or was it all just political posturing the whole time? I don't know.
Wow.
What I do know is that the time for them to pass this bill was last session, and now we're headed into a mixed Congress, and historically that has meant nothing. That has meant gridlock. Nothing good will happen. So it's time for the citizens to get radical on this. And I would urge everybody out there, if you're done, like 85% of all borrowers were essentially done before the pandemic even. If you're like the more than half of all borrowers who had stopped paying on their loans before the pandemic, make a video of yourself as anonymously or anonymously as you want. Destroy your student loan papers, make it 30 seconds or less, and get us the video, and we will very happily post it on the internet and stuff.
Okay, Alan. We'll talk again, because this is an issue that is definitely not going away, right?
We're not going anywhere, Cynthia. They can run and hide, and they can try and sweep it under the floor, but we're not going anywhere.
So you've been listening to Alan Collinge, the founder of Student Loan Justice. I'm Cynthia Pooler. This is Issues That Matter. And if you like this show, please like and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thanks, Alan. Happy New Year, and thank you, everybody, for listening. Happy New Year.
Merry Christmas.
Bye.
Happy New Year.